Hi, my name is Georg Boucher. I run a small international sales and marketing consultancy, and we help foreign firms to enter the German market and also vice versa, German firms entering international markets. And one thing that we deal with every day is international sales. So I want to talk a little bit about how to effectively sell your product or service abroad. Well, first of all, think of trade buddies. Take the United States. And let's guess, where do they sell most of their products to and where do they get most of their products from? Well, think about the North Canada bordering country, think about the South Mexico bordering country, and think about China. I mean, China is a major trade buddy of the United States. And also Germany plays a very important role with the different machinery and all the engineers and the cars. So basically, most countries tend to sell to the neighboring countries because it's quite easy, it's not so far, and there are already kind of points of contact because of the boundaries already. So and then also, well, you would sell your products to countries where there is a high demand for your products. Well, we just mentioned China. It's interesting. We very often think of China as a production market, but the Chinese are crazy about all sorts of, especially, well, let's say German cars. They like to drink Heineken beer, and well, they like to have all sorts of products like all the other countries from all over the world. So China is a very interesting market to sell your products to, but it's not so easy. I mean, let's say you come from the United States, you come from England, you come from Germany, and you would go to China and you would try to sell. One thing that is important, that you sit down with your business partners and you go out for lunch, you go out for drinks. That is very important, that you actually sit together and do all these procedures of eating and drinking together. And the karaoke is very big in Asia, so you should always be prepared before you go there and talk to friends, talk to other companies, what they've done, to see a little bit how to deal with the people in each market. The big question arises, who would you employ for an international sales job? That is very interesting. There was a survey done by Mr. Fikes and his colleagues in 2006, and they said, well, these companies that were asked, 550 different companies, they said, well, we need to hire a person that has very good contacts abroad in that market, and we need to hire a person that has knowledge of the market, and we need to have a person that brings along experience abroad in general, and we need a person that speaks the languages, brings along the qualifications, and we need a person that is strongly connected to head offices, so to always get a feedback. There was an interesting case of L'Oreal in Poland. They wanted to enter the Polish market with a new hairspray, and they didn't hire a Polish person to be in charge. They had an American person, French person, and an Indian person, and that is maybe not so good, because it will always make sense to have somebody in your team from that market who knows the market and who knows the language. So I think that is important. Also, big companies like Procter & Gamble, they make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but they have marketed their products with advertisement. They were marketing a soap that was not very successful, the advertisement, because the husband walked into the bathroom while the wife is in the bathtub, and that never really takes place in Japan. You just don't walk into the bathroom as a husband when your wife is taking a bath, so that advertisement didn't work. So you have to be very careful what kind of advertisement you use for the different markets. Well, how would you sell? Well, it's very easy as it looks on the slide to your right. You could say you're a manufacturing company, you manufacture machines or cars, and you would try to sell to the end consumer or to your end customer. That's not so easy. You would need some sort of operations. You would need shops like retailers, or you might even want to have a wholesaler. The wholesaler would then sell to retailers, and the retailers to the consumers. So you'd have to carefully think about your sales channels and your sales structure. It's very tiring to go walk up and down to contact different retailers. You might always want to go through wholesalers, but then you have to think about a margin for the wholesaler and a margin for the retailer. So it's not so easy. We can't cover that all today, but you'd have to look into detail. The big question is there enough potential on the market where you want to go to? Well, you wouldn't just try to sell something on a market. So there are different strategies to come up and find out if there's enough potential. Well, first of all, a market survey is very important before you try to sell your product or service on your target market. Well, the best thing is I do this too. Always go to the country. I would not want to sell anything to a country without having gone to that country. And I very much like to visit one or the other company that might be interesting and might be sort of a good partner to sell that product there. And what I also like to do is visit fairs abroad, because you meet all sorts of companies from a certain sector on that trade fair, and you talk to the right people. That's very good. You don't necessarily have to expose at that fair, because we always talk about, well, at least 15,000, 20,000 euros at least when you expose at a fair. So you don't necessarily have to invest that money. Why not just travel to the fair and walk around and make some contacts? And then many companies actually seek advice at home. Many seek advice abroad. And what is also sometimes done are group trips. But think about that. If you send a whole delegation, that's very expensive. There's an interesting example to your right-hand side. If you check out the so-called method of analogy, just to pronounce it right, method of analogy. Well, let's say we want to sell DVD players in the Ukraine and we don't know if there's enough market potential. Let's take the figures. We can get them through different internet pages of DVD players sold in Poland and colored televisions sold in Poland. And we could have a certain ratio. Let's say there's about one DVD player sold with 3 televisions, and we could say the Ukrainian market is similar to the Polish market, so they might have a similar ratio. Then we could say the potential of the market is more or less similar like in Poland. We could say that's enough to sell our DVD players in Poland. Another very simple method of measuring a market is the so-called trade audit. Let's check out the market size. We look, there's different internet pages like Statista, for example, and we say how much is produced locally in that market and how much is imported. And then we just subtract the exports, and then we know what is actually sold and used on that market. Another interesting way of checking out the market potential is the so-called chain ratio method. Let's say we want to sell a Nicorette gum in Japan, a substitute for cigarettes, and let's take the base number. We have about 127 million people in Japan, and let's say a Nicorette gum is only used by adult population, let's say 15 to 64. Yeah, it's sad when the kids smoke with 15 already. And let's say that would equal to about 85 million people. And then we say, okay, how many of these people smoke? Well, we say about 26 million. So we go step by step down and define the potential of the market for our Nicorette gum. Ford did something very interesting in Brazil. Not everybody, in general, first of all, not everybody was able to get a bank loan in Brazil. The financial conditions are very different from Europe, for example. So Ford said, let's do some kind of a lottery. And they had 60 people participating in that lottery, and everybody paid over 5 years, every month, a certain amount. So after 5 years, paying every month, a car was paid, and they were drawing one person to get a car each month. So let's say we're talking about 12 payments per year times 5 years is 60 payments. So 60 people made these payments, and then one person got a car after the first month, and well, one person, the last one, got a car after the 5 years. But what I'm trying to say is, so everybody was paying monthly payments, monthly installments, and the cars were given out month by month. So that's a different model, and it seems a bit crazy, but it was a very good way of actually selling cars without having to depend on bank loans. Then when we go onto the market, when we sell, we don't necessarily want to be the first ones on the market because we want to see how competitors did and maybe do it better. But maybe if the competitors were the first ones on the market, they have sold all their products and there is no space for us. We might focus on competitors. We might rather focus on customers, what they want, and offer a better product or service. So there's different entry strategies when we try to sell our product or service on an international market. One thing that is very interesting when you say, let's say we sell a product for $7,500 and in our country, and we take it abroad for another $1,500. So altogether, the so-called landed cost, the cost of the product when we bring it onto the market, would be $9,000 US dollars. And we would work with an independent distributor, and that distributor wants to earn a little bit of money. Let's say in this case, 4,500 US dollars. Our selling price on the target market would be 13,500 with 4,500 US dollars for our distributor. So let's say, when does it make sense to have our own operation and have a substitute for our independent distributor and be on the market ourselves? That's very easy. Let's say we have a total estimated cost for general manager, for sales managers, sales agents, staff, warehousing operations, and a rental cost for offices and warehousing. Well, that would equal more or less to 450,000 US dollars. So that means as soon as we've sold 100 pieces, if you look back, we give 4,500 US dollars to the distributor, and if we sell 100 pieces, we would have saved these 450,000 US dollars, and that is the cost of our own operation. And as soon as we sell 100 pieces or more, that justifies our wholly owned marketing subsidiary, where we decide to be actually present on the market. Then what is very costly also and expensive, if we have a lot of staff, I always have to think of the American company JetBlue. It's a airline company, and they have 800 people working from home. So the idea is you don't necessarily want to be on that market, and you don't necessarily need to be having sort of big office spaces. Why not do it in an alternative way like JetBlue and have 800 people working from home? That is very nice. They sort of log on the system when they're available. They log off when they're not available. So think about ways of saving money when you do sales abroad and when you set something up. McDonald's is very interesting how they started their sales. You know that they work with their own restaurants and with the franchise model. And if you look at this graph to your right, it's very interesting. I mean, where would you go first? If you're an American firm, well, it definitely makes sense to go to English-speaking countries. And that's what they did. You can see over here, they went after the launch of their restaurants and a product up to 1969. They started in the UK, they started in Australia, and then they went also straight away to Brazil, because Brazil has a lot of potential, 160 million inhabitants. And then step by step, they were going to markets that were more challenging. So what I'm trying to say is sell to these countries where you feel familiar, where you have different habits, and then step by step with the experience you've gained, sell your products and services to further companies with the experience behind. What is also very interesting when we talk about McDonald's, McDonald's in Japan, they had a joint venture. So they were working with a businessman called Dan Fujita. And the thing was, usually McDonald's wanted to open their restaurants in rural areas just outside of the cities, like it's very common in the United States. But then Fujita said, no, don't do that. Go to the shopping center, because that's where most people hang out. The Japanese don't necessarily drive out of town and drive around in that sense. So McDonald's opened up the restaurants in the shopping center, and also the joint venture is good to get all sorts of government permits. So it always makes sense to have a local partner when you sell. Walmart, you all know Walmart. It's interesting when you look at Germany. They've opened up supermarkets and they closed them down again. The German market is saturated, and Walmart was maybe a little bit too big. They were thinking too big. But it's not only Germany. They went to Argentina, and they sold meat that is very common in the United States, but it wasn't that kind of meat that Argentinians like. They sold all sorts of jewelry, but not that kind of jewelry that Argentinians liked. And the funny thing was, the United States has 110 volts. So they sold all sorts of electrical appliances with 110 volts, but Argentina has 220 volts. So these electrical appliances in the supermarket, they weren't any good. So again, before you start selling, before you set up your operations, do a careful market study. Also awesome, please excuse my French, it's not very nice when you translate that word, or when you take that word in Poland. It basically means something like I shit on it. So when Osram started selling their light bulbs in Poland with that brand name, the Polish were laughing very hard, or they even felt offended. So think about your product name and check out if that is appropriate in that target country where you want to sell your product. So one interesting thing could be e-commerce when you enter a market, because it's not very expensive. You set up an internet page, but then you'd have to think about infrastructure. How are the roads? How is the internet availability? So again, you need to check out that market. I want to give you a very interesting example about India. Think about India. There's so many different languages. So when you advertise for your products or services in India, what kind of language should you use? And then where would you advertise? Television is very common, but then in which language? So newspapers, not everybody reads a newspaper. Many people cannot read. So what is very common in India is just to use vans that are parked in rural areas, and you rather use pictures than text, and you advertise on these vans. And then many companies in India rely on important people like school teachers or the so-called panchayats, the village heads, and you try to convince them, tell them your product is cool, and they will promote that within their society. And then what also makes sense, why not participate in a market? You might reach 5,000 people immediately in a small market. It doesn't sound very common for us that we would take a product on a market, but even Colgate and Heinz, ketchup and toothpaste, they hire school kids, and these school kids go around by bike. Well, hire school kids sounds a bit funny. They give money to school kids, and they go around on their bikes and they sell the products. They pay them a little bit of money to afford schooling or university. So that is a very interesting sales model. I just wanted to mention this to see that at some other parts of the world, things work differently, but can also be very successfully if you do it right, if you prepare yourself. And don't forget, you always have to have in the back of your head customs when you take products abroad. There is the so-called luxury tax in Japan for cars, about 10%. There's the value-added tax. Also, when you bring products to Germany from abroad, you'd have to pay the 19% value-added tax when you bring the products in. And then you have to pay taxes for these products. So in some cases, you want to bring unfinished products. The taxes are lower to avoid these high taxes at the customs. And then what is also very important, that you secure your sales. There's different companies like Coface or Mapfre, and you pay a little bit of money, and these companies secure your sales to a foreign country. That means if that company does not pay you, your sale is insured and you get the money from the insurance company. Well, what if in the case of Inca Kola, well, if you think about Peru, the Peruvians, they love Inca Kola. I mean, Inca Kola is not really, it's not a cola in that sense. It tastes a little bit sweet. And, well, Coca-Cola was a little bit upset in Peru because the Peruvians just preferred Inca Kola and they wouldn't drink and buy so much Coca-Cola. So what did Coca-Cola do in that case? They couldn't convince them to drink more Coca-Cola. They just bought Inca Kola, and then now Coca-Cola is happy because the Peruvians are drinking their product. Inca Kola now belongs to them. Thank you very much for your attention. Good luck with your international sales. All the best. Have a good day.